Good to see you. I'm Patrick, and today I'll be covering a really rough topic: the worst wedding deaths ever. From a couple who stepped onto unstable rock for social media shots, to a safari-themed wedding where an unexpected guest from the wild ended the celebration in the most terrifying way possible.
It was March 18th, 2017, in Detroit, Michigan. The historic hotel had been a landmark in the city's downtown district since 1924, recently renovated to preserve its original architectural features while meeting modern safety standards. Carmen Foster was 34, mother of the bride, and a recently retired elementary school principal, known for her calm demeanor during emergencies. The evening was cold and clear, as the wedding reception was in full swing in the hotel's grand ballroom on the second floor. She had consumed 4 glasses of wine over the course of 2 hours, more alcohol than she typically drank. Against her better judgment, she had chosen to wear 3-inch heels for the special occasion, despite usually avoiding them due to a previous ankle injury. The hotel's main entrance featured its original 1920s brass revolving door, a massive 4-chamber structure weighing approximately 400 pounds. The door required significant physical force to move and had a tendency to jam when pushed too hard from multiple directions. The door's central mechanism would lock when opposing forces exceeded its operational limits. The alarm was triggered by a faulty smoke detector in the kitchen area, but guests had no way of knowing this was a false alarm. Following standard evacuation procedures, 150 wedding guests immediately began moving toward the main exit. Carmen stood up quickly, stumbled slightly due to her unfamiliar footwear and alcohol consumption, then joined the crowd heading for the stairwell. The mass of people created significant pressure as they funneled toward the narrow revolving door entrance. Carmen entered one of the 4 chambers as the crowd continued pushing from behind. Multiple people attempted to enter adjacent chambers simultaneously, creating opposing forces that caused the heavy brass mechanism to jam completely. Carmen found herself trapped in her chamber as the crowd pressure intensified from behind. The continued pushing from panicked guests began forcing her body against the thick glass panel of her chamber. The compression was distributed across her torso and chest as people behind her were unable to stop the forward momentum. The sustained pressure began fracturing Carmen's ribs as her body was compressed between the immovable glass in front and the crowd behind. Unable to breathe effectively due to the compression, Carmen lost consciousness from what medical professionals term compression asphyxia. The fire department arrived and quickly determined the alarm was false. However, they immediately recognized the emergency at the main entrance, where guests were trapped in the jammed revolving door. A maintenance crew with hydraulic tools was called to free the trapped individuals. The crew worked systematically to release pressure from the door mechanism and extract each trapped person. Carmen was freed from her chamber, but paramedics were unable to revive her. She was pronounced dead from crushing injuries and mechanical asphyxiation. The investigation included security footage clearly showing the sequence of events leading to the door jam. The fire department's report confirmed the false alarm originated from a defective smoke detector. Multiple witness statements corroborated the crowd pressure and Carmen's trapped position. A toxicology report showed her blood alcohol content was 0.08%, indicating impairment. Hotel maintenance records confirmed the door's weight specifications and previous incidents of jamming under pressure. It was October 22, 2017, at a historic hall in Savannah, Georgia. The evening temperature held steady at 72 degrees, with high humidity typical of the coastal region. Inside the century-old venue, original hardwood floors creaked softly under the weight of guests. The building's aged infrastructure showed uneven floorboards and subtle settling over decades. The reception centerpiece was an elaborate 5-tier wedding cake that had been delivered earlier in the afternoon. The massive confection stood nearly 6 feet tall and weighed approximately 320 pounds, reinforced with steel dowels and dense fondant layers that required special structural support beyond what a standard table could provide. Event staff had reinforced the display table by stacking concrete cinder blocks beneath the surface, concealing the makeshift support system under white tablecloths. Roswell Cobb, a 63-year-old retired construction worker and brother-in-law of the groom, had volunteered to assist with the reception setup throughout the day. Known among family and friends for his practical problem-solving skills and willingness to help with manual tasks, Roswell had spent his career working with heavy materials. His experience with construction had made him a natural choice for handling the physical aspects of venue preparation. The display table had been positioned near the center of the main reception hall, where guests could easily view and photograph the impressive cake. However, the table legs had been placed unevenly on the aged wooden flooring, which featured gaps and irregularities that had developed over the building's long history. The floor showed signs of settling and wear. As the evening progressed, guests frequently leaned against the table edge while taking photographs and admiring the cake's decorative work. The additional weight and pressure from multiple people pressing against the table created stress on the already precarious support system. The cinder blocks beneath the tablecloth had been stacked without proper interlocking. Roswell noticed that the table appeared slightly unstable and crouched down to examine the support structure and make adjustments to the block positioning. His position placed him directly beneath the table's edge, with his head and upper body positioned under the heavy load. The aged floor flexed noticeably under the combined weight. The structural failure occurred when one table leg slipped into a gap between floorboards that had widened over time. The sudden shift caused the entire table to collapse inward toward the compromised leg. The stacked cinder blocks, no longer properly supported, fell in multiple directions as the table surface tilted sharply. One concrete block, weighing approximately 35 pounds, fell edge first and struck Roswell directly on the head and upper neck area. The impact occurred with significant force due to the block's weight and height from which it fell. The blow caused immediate skull fractures and severe trauma to the cervical spine region. Roswell showed no movement following the impact and remained motionless beneath the collapsed table structure. Several guests witnessed the incident and immediately called for emergency assistance, while others worked to clear the debris and access Roswell. Emergency medical personnel arrived within 11 minutes and immediately began assessment and treatment protocols. Despite their efforts, Roswell was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death was severe head trauma resulting from blunt force impact to the skull and neck. Building inspectors documented the uneven floor conditions and inadequate load distribution methods used for the cake display. The investigation revealed that aged flooring, improper support stacking, and excessive load concentration had created conditions for the structural failure. The final report concluded that inadequate structural assessment and improper load-bearing techniques were the primary factors contributing to the fatal collapse. It was November 12, 2016, in a glacier formation in south-central Alaska. Overcast skies brought temperatures in the low 20s, with light snow and minimal wind. An ice cave, formed by natural melt patterns, extended approximately 40 feet deep. Recent temperature fluctuations had affected ice stability throughout the cave system, with limited daylight hours and early sunset. Miles Griffin was 25, an outdoor gear reviewer with wilderness experience and a YouTube channel focused on extreme location content. Griffin was skilled in winter survival and had experience with ice formations, but had increasingly prioritized dramatic content creation for his online audience. Griffin planned to propose to his girlfriend, Harper Ellis, inside the ice cave while filming content for his channel. He had researched the location and brought appropriate cold weather gear. His proposal plan involved multiple camera setups that required extended time inside the ice cave, prioritizing filmed content and presentation over minimizing exposure to the unstable environment. Griffin noticed stress fractures in the ice ceiling, but chose to continue filming and proceed with the proposal, believing he could finish recording before the instability became dangerous. He pointed out the cracks to Ellis, but dismissed them as manageable, indicating his belief that the proposal could be completed safely despite the visible warning signs. The disaster struck approximately 25 feet inside the ice cave, where Griffin had positioned multiple cameras throughout the chamber. Griffin began his proposal sequence, kneeling and reaching into his jacket pocket. Ellis positioned herself according to his earlier directions for optimal camera angles. Recent temperature fluctuations had compromised the ice cave's structural integrity through repeated freeze-thaw cycles that had weakened the ceiling supports. The existing stress fractures had expanded throughout the day as temperatures varied. Without warning, a section of the cave ceiling collapsed suddenly and completely. Large ice chunks fell across the cave entrance and interior chamber in a matter of seconds. Griffin was struck by falling ice and trapped under debris near the center of the cave, with a large ice block pinning his legs and torso, while smaller chunks covered his upper body. Ellis, positioned closer to the entrance for filming purposes, was partially caught in the collapse, but managed to crawl through the debris field and escape the cave with cuts and bruises on her arms and back. Griffin remained conscious for a short time, but was completely immobilized by the ice debris, with his airway initially unobstructed as the cold rapidly set in. The freezing conditions began rapidly draining his body heat, as shock and immobility prevented him from generating warmth beneath the fallen ice. Ellis could hear him moving under the debris, but was unable to lift the heavy ice blocks that had pinned him. Ellis immediately attempted to call emergency services, but found no cell coverage in the remote location. She hiked to higher ground while marking her path and established contact with rescue services after reaching an elevated position. Due to the remote location and specialized equipment requirements for ice rescue operations, rescue teams were delayed in reaching the site. Ellis guided rescue teams to the location using GPS coordinates from Griffin's equipment. Rescue efforts located Griffin under the ice debris several hours after the collapse, but he had succumbed to hypothermia following severe traumatic injuries that left him trapped and unable to escape. His cameras had recorded the incident, including the collapse sequence and timing of events. Recovery teams extracted Griffin's body and equipment from the collapsed cave. GPS data from their devices confirmed the exact location and environmental conditions at the time of the incident. Camera footage showed the proposal setup and documented the sudden nature of the ceiling collapse. Autopsy findings confirmed death by hypothermia and blunt force trauma from the ice collapse. The case was ruled accidental death caused by natural ice formation failure. Investigation concluded that recent temperature changes had destabilized the cave structure, creating the stress fractures that led to the sudden collapse.
It was September 7, 2017, at a ballroom in Charleston, South Carolina. The ballroom used for the event was a renovated historic building in downtown Charleston that featured exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, and a vaulted ceiling with heavy wooden beams. The venue was popular for its elegant atmosphere. 29-year-old Rachel Kim arrived for her best friend's wedding reception. Rachel worked as a pediatric nurse and had arranged her shift schedule weeks in advance to ensure she could serve as maid of honor. She had known the bride since they were 7 years old. Having grown up in the same neighborhood, the two had been inseparable through school and college. For this wedding, the event company had installed a custom lighting system that included 8 moving spotlights, colored wash lights, and decorative string lighting suspended from a metal grid attached to the ceiling beams. The lighting package had been specifically requested by the bride to create a nightclub atmosphere. The lighting grid was a large steel frame, about 16 feet long and 12 feet wide. It was hanging from the ceiling using 4 cables. One of the cables was attached with a mounting bracket that was not strong enough to hold the full weight of the grid and the equipment on it. The lighting setup weighed almost 100 pounds more than what the bracket could safely support. Rachel had spent most of the evening fulfilling her duties as maid of honor, helping with the bride's dress, coordinating with vendors, and giving a toast during dinner. By 9:15, the formal events had concluded and the dance floor had opened. She was dancing with a group of bridesmaids in the center of the floor when the failure occurred. During a song with heavy bass, the vibrations from the sound system combined with the movement of dancers below caused the overloaded bracket to separate from the beam. The cable detached, and the grid immediately tilted. Within 2 seconds, a second cable pulled free, and the entire structure began to fall. Rachel was directly beneath the grid when it came down. The metal structure, along with the attached lighting equipment, weighed approximately 400 pounds and hit her from above, driving her to the floor and causing catastrophic head and spinal injuries. The impact was so severe that she was knocked unconscious instantly. The music stopped immediately. The venue manager called emergency services and directed several men to carefully raise the structure. Rachel was unconscious, not breathing, and bleeding severely from head trauma. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes and began advanced life support, but there was no response. She was transported to a medical center, where trauma physicians continued efforts for 18 minutes before declaring her dead. The cause of death was determined to be massive skull fracture and brain injury incompatible with life. The wedding was immediately canceled after the bride collapsed upon hearing the news. The ballroom was closed and city building inspectors arrived to examine the structural failure. The venue faced multiple investigations into its permitting and contractor oversight procedures. After the findings, the venue paid heavily in compensation to the affected family and was temporarily shut down by city authorities. What was meant to be an elegant lighting setup turned into a deadly trap.
It was June 3, 2015. Columbus, Ohio was experiencing a pleasant early summer evening with temperatures in the low 70s and clear skies. The wedding reception was being held at a mid-size banquet hall with polished concrete floors and exposed brick walls. About 90 guests had finished dinner and were waiting for the newlyweds to make their grand entrance onto the dance floor. The venue featured a backstage area behind a decorative metal archway. The reception coordinator had planned a dramatic reveal involving a 6-foot balloon filled with colorful confetti that would burst above the dance floor as the couple entered. A portable air compressor had been brought backstage to inflate the balloon just before the entrance cue. Daxley Finn was 31 years old and worked at a local party supply store, handling event decorations and balloon arrangements. He had been friends with both the bride and groom for several years and had volunteered to help with the special entrance effect. Experienced with balloon displays, he took pride in creating memorable celebration moments, and the coordinator asked him to handle the inflation because of his expertise. The reception had been running smoothly when the DJ announced that the couple's entrance would happen in just a few minutes. Daxley moved backstage with the balloon and began connecting it to the compressor. The balloon was thick latex, designed to hold significant pressure. He had inflated similar balloons many times and felt confident in the process. As Daxley began filling the balloon, he watched the latex expand quickly. The compressor was set slightly high to ensure the balloon would burst dramatically when triggered. He held the neck steady while monitoring the size. White stress streaks appeared across the surface, showing it was nearing maximum capacity. The coordinator called that the entrance cue was approaching. The balloon reached roughly 5.5 feet in diameter when the pressure became too great. It burst with a loud, explosive sound that startled everyone nearby. The sudden noise and shock caused Daxley to jerk backward. He lost his footing and stumbled toward the metal archway positioned directly behind him about 3 feet away. The arch was constructed of steel tubing with mounting brackets along the lower frame, one with a thin exposed edge where a protective cap was missing. As Daxley fell, the left side of his neck struck that protruding bracket, The sharp edge caused a deep laceration to the side of his neck. Witnesses later described heavy arterial bleeding before responders arrived. He collapsed behind the archway, visible to a few people near the entrance. Witnesses saw heavy arterial bleeding and called for emergency help immediately. Someone applied firm pressure while others cleared the area. Despite the effort, the bleeding was severe and difficult to control. Over the next couple of minutes, Daxley became pale and disoriented, then lost consciousness about 2 to 3 minutes after the fall from rapid blood loss. He was unresponsive when paramedics arrived. Emergency responders reached the scene within 7 minutes. Despite immediate treatment, the vascular injury and blood loss were too extensive. Daxley was pronounced dead at the scene from traumatic neck injury with major carotid vessel damage caused by the laceration and impact. Police investigators documented the backstage area and collected the burst balloon remnants and the compressor. Witness statements confirmed the balloon rupture and fall. The death was ruled accidental, caused by traumatic neck injury after the unexpected balloon burst and impact with an exposed metal fixture. The couple's entrance was canceled, and the venue later relocated displays and required protective covers on structural brackets to reduce similar hazards. It was the evening of Saturday, May 20th, 2017, at an event hall in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The reception had moved into its third hour. The open bar had been active since shortly after dinner service ended. Guests rotated between the dance floor and the courtyard, where a decorative stone fountain sat at the center of a square brick patio. The fountain's raised edge measured approximately 18 inches high and ran in a continuous circular rim. Moisture collected along the stone surface as humidity settled over the property. Ryan Bossier, 31, had arrived from Houston the day before. He worked as a civil engineer for a mid-sized firm, primarily handling municipal drainage and roadway projects. Colleagues later described him as cautious by nature, known for double-checking site measurements and avoiding unnecessary risk. He had known the groom since their second year at university, where they studied in the same program and shared several upper-level courses. After graduation, they remained in regular contact, traveling for major life events. Former classmates had gathered around him for most of the evening. Staff later stated that the group did not appear aggressive or disruptive, though several had been served multiple rounds. Bar receipts showed a steady shift from beer to liquor after 8:30 p.m. Shortly after 9 p.m., several members of the group stepped outside to the courtyard. Surveillance footage later reviewed by investigators showed Ryan climbing onto the fountain's stone edge, while others remained seated. His arms were extended slightly from his sides, maintaining balance as he faced the group. The stone surface reflected light from below, indicating dampness. At 9:17 p.m., his right foot shifted backward. His heel lost traction against the condensation on the stone rim. The footage showed no attempt to sit or brace. His center of gravity moved behind his base of support, and he fell backward. The back of his head struck the raised stone edge before his body continued downward to the brick pavement. He remained motionless for several seconds. Witnesses reported that he appeared to be breathing normally. No blood was immediately visible in the low courtyard lighting. His chest rose and fell at a steady pace. Those nearby assumed he had fallen intentionally or was briefly stunned. No emergency call was made at that time. For approximately 8 minutes, he remained on the ground. Surveillance showed 2 individuals stepping around him to re-enter the hall. At 9:25 p.m., one of the group crouched beside him and attempted to wake him. His eyes were partially open. His breathing had slowed and become irregular. At that point, someone ran inside to alert staff, and 911 was called. Emergency medical services arrived within minutes. Responders documented severe head trauma and decreasing respiratory effort. He was transported to a local hospital. Despite intervention, Ryan Bossier was pronounced dead at 12:44 a.m. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be traumatic brain injury resulting from blunt impact to the occipital region of the skull. His blood alcohol content measured 0.21. No criminal charges were filed. In the weeks that followed, the venue applied non-slip coating to the fountain stone perimeter and revised event safety procedures regarding alcohol monitoring in outdoor areas. It was July 4th, 2015, in Austin, Texas. The ranch sprawled across 200 acres of hill country, providing ample space for large celebrations and events throughout the year. Rolling hills covered in native Texas wildflowers and scattered live oak trees created a picturesque setting for outdoor gatherings. David Thornfield was 45, father of the groom, and a volunteer firefighter with 20 years of emergency response experience who had noticed several safety concerns regarding the fireworks setup. His extensive training had taught him to recognize dangerous situations, and he observed that the professional pyrotechnics team had positioned their launch zone only 100 feet from the main catering area, closer than the 150-foot minimum distance typically recommended, with propane tanks stored approximately 80 feet from the launch zone, well within the danger radius for debris and errant fireworks. David had positioned himself near the propane storage area to monitor safety conditions during the show. The catering area included 6 20-pound propane tanks connected to portable grills and heating units. 30 minutes before the show began, the wind direction had shifted from southwest to northeast, meaning debris would blow toward the catering and storage area instead of the open field as originally planned. The fireworks display commenced with a series of aerial shells launched from mortar tubes. An errant firework landed in the dry grass surrounding the propane storage area, approximately 15 feet from the nearest tank. The grass had not received rain for 3 weeks and ignited immediately upon contact. David observed the small grass fire and immediately recognized the potential for catastrophic explosion if the flames reached the propane tanks. Drawing on his firefighting experience, he ran toward the storage area with the intention of shutting off the tank valves before the fire could spread. The first propane tank exploded, sending a massive fireball 30 feet into the air and launching heavy metal debris in all directions. A heavy metal tank fragment weighing approximately 60 pounds struck David in both legs, pinning him to the ground approximately 40 feet from the explosion center. The impact crushed both of his lower legs and caused severe internal injuries. Secondary fires ignited by the initial explosion prevented immediate rescue attempts, as burning propane continued to fuel flames throughout the storage area. Emergency personnel arriving at the scene were forced to establish a safety perimeter and wait for the fires to be controlled before attempting extraction. Fire department units arrived and began suppressing the propane-fueled fires while assessing David's condition from a safe distance. David remained conscious initially and was able to speak with his family members who had gathered at the safety perimeter, but lost consciousness from blood loss. Firefighters required 25 minutes to safely extinguish all fires and remove additional propane tanks from the area before attempting rescue. David was extracted from beneath the tank fragment using hydraulic rescue tools, but could not be revived. Blood loss from his crushed legs and internal injuries had caused fatal hypovolemic shock. He was transported by helicopter to a local hospital where he was pronounced dead from crushing trauma and internal bleeding. The investigation included witness video footage clearly showing David running toward the explosion site in an attempt to prevent the disaster. The fire marshal's report identified multiple safety violations in the fireworks setup, including inadequate clearance distances and improper storage of flammable materials. Debris analysis confirmed the tank fragment that struck David came from the initial explosion. It was July 4th, 2018, in a residential backyard in Springfield, Missouri. The evening air held at a comfortable 78 degrees as twilight approached, with clear skies providing perfect conditions for the planned fireworks send-off. The modest suburban property featured a well-maintained lawn surrounded by wooden fencing, with neighbors gathering on adjacent patios to watch. The backyard ceremony had concluded an hour earlier, and guests now assembled in a semicircle around a designated launch area near the back fence. A collection of consumer fireworks had been arranged on a folding table, including several aerial shells designed for backyard use. The launch setup consisted of an improvised metal launch tube not rated for repeated use that had been employed multiple times throughout the summer. Pippa Jantz, a 24-year-old college senior and sister-in-law of the bride, positioned herself near the front of the gathered crowd with her smartphone ready to record the finale. Known among friends for her enthusiasm for capturing memorable moments, Pippa had volunteered to document the send-off for the couple's social media accounts. A relative, experienced with consumer fireworks, had taken charge of the launch sequence using the same improvised metal tube that had successfully fired dozens of shells over the past several months. The tube showed visible signs of wear, including small dents and discoloration. Guests remained positioned within 3 to 4 feet of the setup, far closer than recommended safety guidelines. The metal tube measured approximately 18 inches in length and 2 inches in diameter, designed to contain the initial explosion that propels aerial fireworks skyward. However, the tube had sustained internal damage from previous launches that was not visible from the outside. Additionally, the fireworks selected for the finale had been inadvertently loaded upside down, with the fuse end pointing toward the bottom. Pippa stood directly in front of the launch tube, holding her phone at eye level to capture the moment when the firework would streak into the sky. Other guests had positioned themselves in a loose arc around the launch area, none maintaining an adequate safety perimeter. The relative lit the fuse and stepped back, expecting normal sequence of events. Instead of launching skyward, the firework ignited inside the obstructed tube. The explosive force had nowhere to escape due to the reversed loading and internal tube damage. Pressure built instantly within the confined metal space until the tube ruptured outward in multiple directions. Metal fragments from the ruptured tube traveled at high velocity in a cone-shaped pattern. Several pieces struck Pippa in the neck and lower jaw area, with one fragment severing a major blood vessel in her neck. The force of the explosion knocked her backward onto the grass, where she immediately began bleeding heavily. Multiple witnesses saw the incident and immediately called for emergency assistance, while others attempted first aid. The bleeding was severe and difficult to control despite efforts to apply direct pressure. Pippa lost consciousness within minutes as blood loss progressed rapidly. Emergency medical services arrived within 9 minutes and immediately began advanced trauma protocols. Despite aggressive treatment, Pippa was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death was exsanguination due to severing of a major neck vessel by metal fragments. Fire department investigators recovered pieces of the ruptured launch tube and documented the improper loading of the firework. The investigation revealed that internal tube damage combined with reversed firework orientation had created conditions for the catastrophic failure. The final report concluded that equipment failure due to repeated use and improper firework loading were the primary factors in the fatal incident. It was August 3rd, 2014, in the open grassland plains of central Montana. A severe thunderstorm was approaching from the west, with temperatures reaching 78 degrees Fahrenheit under strong, gusty winds. Dark clouds showed visible lightning activity several miles away, advancing steadily across flat terrain with no trees, buildings, or natural shelter. The wide, exposed prairie offered little protection as weather conditions deteriorated, a known hazard during summer storm season in the region. Kelsey Hart was 27, a wildlife photographer who had moved to Montana to document prairie ecosystems for environmental publications. Her boyfriend, Quinlan Reed, was 29 and worked as a regional grocery store manager. Hart had planned to propose to Reed during the approaching thunderstorm, timing the proposal to coincide with the storm's arrival based on weather tracking data later recovered from her phone. The proposal was intended to take place outdoors, with the storm forming the visual backdrop. Hart drove Reed to an isolated area of grassland, timing their arrival to align with the storm's projected path. She positioned them on slightly elevated ground, approximately 2 feet higher than the surrounding terrain, to provide unobstructed views of the approaching weather system. Hart brought professional photography equipment, including metal tripods and portable lighting gear, which she arranged in the open field. Witness reconstruction and phone movement data later indicated hesitation and delayed departure despite worsening storm conditions. Phone records showed Hart actively monitoring radar data throughout the afternoon while positioning the proposal location ahead of the storm's projected movement. Weather tracking applications documented repeated checks of lightning density, storm speed, and direction as the system continued to advance toward their location. What followed unfolded on the slight rise in the grassland where Hart had positioned the equipment. The elevated position provided clear sight lines across the prairie, but also made the couple and their gear the most prominent objects in the surrounding landscape. As the storm drew closer, Hart began the proposal sequence while adjusting camera equipment in the open field, remaining near the metal gear as conditions intensified. Lightning activity increased across the prairie, with strikes occurring more frequently as the storm cell approached. Hart remained positioned at the highest point in the immediate area, holding metal photography equipment. She was struck by lightning while standing in the open grassland near the camera setup. The electrical discharge passed through her body into the surrounding ground, leaving visible disturbance patterns in the soil. Reed, positioned several feet away, was not directly struck and moved away from the equipment as storm intensity escalated. Hart collapsed immediately following the strike. Due to the continuing storm conditions, movement away from the scene was limited until the worst of the weather passed. Reed contacted emergency services using Hart's phone. Because of the remote location and hazardous weather, emergency responders were delayed until conditions improved enough to allow safe access to the area. Responders later reached the site and confirmed Hart was deceased. Investigators documented injuries consistent with a lightning strike. Camera equipment recovered at the scene showed electrical damage. Weather Service data confirmed the timing and location of lightning strikes in the area, matching the incident location. Phone records confirmed Hart had been actively tracking the storm's approach throughout the afternoon. An autopsy determined the cause of death to be cardiac arrest resulting from a lightning strike. Officials ruled the death accidental, concluding that remaining in an exposed, elevated location during active lightning allowed the electrical discharge to pass through her body, with nearby metal equipment providing a conductive path once the strike occurred.
It was April 21st, 2018, in Savannah, Georgia, when 24-year-old Jessica Morris attended her college roommate's wedding reception. Jessica worked as a marketing coordinator for a tech startup and had flown in from Austin 2 days earlier for the wedding weekend. She had been close with the bride since their freshman year and was excited to celebrate with their entire friend group. The wedding reception was held in the estate's main ballroom, a 2-story space with a grand staircase connecting the upper gallery to the main floor. Jessica had arrived at 5 o'clock wearing a burgundy cocktail dress and 4-inch stiletto heels that she had bought online specifically for the occasion. She wore heels occasionally for work events, but was not used to walking in shoes this high. The shoes looked perfect with her dress, but pinched her toes. The reception included dinner, speeches, and dancing. Jessica spent most of the evening on the dance floor with friends, taking frequent trips to the open bar between songs. By 9:30, she had consumed 4 glasses of wine and 2 cocktails over the course of the evening. She felt buzzed and happy, laughing loudly with her friends. When someone suggested taking group photos in the upper gallery, Jessica joined them enthusiastically. They retrieved props from a photo booth station that had been set up near the coat check. To return to the main floor, Jessica chose to use the grand staircase rather than wait for the elevator with the rest of her group. The stairs were carpeted and well lit, with a polished wooden handrail on both sides. There were 18 steps in total, divided into 2 sections with a landing in between. Jessica descended the first section without difficulty, holding the handrail with her right hand. When she reached the landing and turned to continue down the second section, she misjudged the position of the first step. Her left heel caught the edge of the stair, and she pitched forward. The combination of the high heels and alcohol had affected her balance and coordination. She tried to catch herself with the handrail but could not grip it in time. She fell headfirst down the remaining steps, tumbling 4 times before landing at the bottom. Several guests witnessed the fall and rushed to help her. Jessica was conscious and sitting up, insisting she was fine despite visible scrapes on her hands and a small cut above her eyebrow. She laughed nervously and made a joke about the open bar. The estate's event coordinator offered to call an ambulance, but Jessica refused, embarrassed by the attention and not wanting to ruin the party. Her friends helped her to a chair. Jessica had no obvious broken bones. Her speech was clear, and she was able to move all her limbs. She was advised to go to the hospital for evaluation, but Jessica declined, saying she just wanted to get back to her hotel and sleep it off. 2 friends drove her to her hotel room, where she cleaned her scrapes, applied bandages, and took 3 ibuprofen for the headache that had developed. She changed into pajamas and got into bed at 11:30. During the night, Jessica's condition deteriorated. She had suffered a subdural hematoma from striking her head during the fall. Blood slowly accumulated in the space between her brain and skull, creating pressure that gradually affected her brain function. She was alone in the hotel room with no one to notice her declining state. At 10 o'clock the next morning, hotel housekeeping knocked on her door for late checkout, but received no answer. After repeated knocking, they used a master key to enter and found Jessica unresponsive in bed. They called emergency services immediately. Paramedics arrived and found Jessica with fixed and dilated pupils, shallow breathing, and no response to stimuli. They transported her to the hospital, but she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner determined that the subdural hematoma had caused fatal brain swelling. Her friends were notified within hours. The estate reviewed their safety protocols regarding alcohol service and staircase access. Changes were later implemented to prevent similar incidents in the future. What appeared to be a minor stumble led to a silent death hours later.
It was May 21st, 2018. Richmond, Virginia was experiencing a warm spring afternoon with temperatures in the mid-80s and high humidity. The wedding ceremony was taking place inside a large enclosed garden tent on a private estate. The white canvas structure measured about 40 by 60 feet and was mostly sealed against possible thunderstorms, with only small side flaps partially open. Inside, the air was still, warm and humid with limited ventilation. The ceremony space had been decorated with fresh floral arrangements throughout the tent. Dense clusters of white lilies, pink peonies, and eucalyptus branches lined the aisle and formed a large arch at the altar, with additional arrangements along the walls. The strong floral atmosphere filled the enclosed space. About 70 guests were seated in white folding chairs facing the altar. Meredith Spey was 36 years old and worked in administration at a local business office. She was the bride's older sister and had taken on the role of ceremony coordinator. Meredith was organized and reliable, often taking charge of family events. She also had a documented history of severe anaphylaxis, including a prior emergency hospitalization after allergen exposure. Because of this, she routinely carried an epinephrine auto-injector stored in a small clutch purse on a chair in the front row, about 30 feet from the altar. The ceremony had been proceeding smoothly for about 20 minutes. Meredith had spent the previous 40 minutes moving around the floral displays, coordinating with vendors, and checking decorations, often working near the altar arch and occasionally brushing the arrangements. The enclosed tent allowed warmth, humidity, and airborne plant particles to accumulate rather than disperse. As the bride approached the altar, Meredith stepped forward to adjust the train of the wedding dress. While standing near the floral arch, she noticed early symptoms: throat irritation, coughing, and chest tightness. At first, the reaction seemed mild, and she tried to continue assisting while taking slow breaths. Over the next several minutes, the symptoms worsened. Her coughing became more frequent, and she began wheezing audibly. Guests in the front rows noticed she appeared flushed and struggled to speak clearly. Meredith signaled toward the front row where her purse was located and started moving toward it, recognizing she needed her injector. By the time she reached the aisle, roughly 10 minutes after the first symptoms, her breathing had become labored and her voice hoarse. Family members hurried to retrieve the auto-injector and brought it to her. In the urgency of the moment, The first injector failed to discharge properly when pressed against her leg. A second injector was found in the purse, but time had already passed as her condition continued to deteriorate. Meredith collapsed to her knees and then onto her side as relatives attempted to administer the second dose and call emergency services. She was still breathing, but shallowly, with increasing airway swelling and reduced oxygen intake. Guests cleared space while someone initiated first aid and waited for paramedics. Emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes of the initial call and found Meredith unresponsive with severe respiratory distress consistent with advanced anaphylaxis. Paramedics administered epinephrine, oxygen, and airway support before transporting her to a nearby hospital. Despite continued treatment, she went into cardiac arrest shortly after arrival and could not be revived. The medical examiner later ruled the death accidental, attributing it to anaphylactic shock following allergen exposure inside the enclosed tent, with delayed effective epinephrine delivery listed as a contributing factor. The ceremony was halted, guests were escorted outside, and the floral arrangements were removed as the family postponed the wedding. It was the evening of Saturday, July 12, 2014, outside a private event venue along Route 7 in Harlan County, Kentucky. The reception had been underway for nearly 2 hours. The venue lights ended at the edge of the gravel lot, and beyond them, the road was unlit and narrow, bordered by brush, shallow drainage ditches, and uneven shoulders. Music from inside carried faintly into the warm night air. Nora Callahan was 28 years old. She worked as a pharmacy technician in Nashville and rarely missed important events for the people she cared about. She had met the bride during their freshman year of college, and the two had remained close long after graduation. Nora was often the one who stepped in when energy dipped, organizing group trips, planning birthday surprises, making sure photographs were taken before the night ended. At the reception, she moved easily between the dance floor and the tables, laughing with relatives she had met only hours earlier. When someone mentioned the old local tradition of temporarily kidnapping the bride for a short ride, Nora immediately leaned into the idea. It was meant to be playful theater. When the bride hesitated mid-conversation with her grandmother, Nora offered to take her place. She raised her hand as if volunteering for a stage role. A ribbon from the gift table was tied across her eyes as a blindfold. Guests near the entrance cheered as she allowed herself to be guided toward a pickup truck waiting at the edge of the lot. 5 people entered the vehicle, the driver and 3 longtime friends of the groom, with Nora in the rear seat. The truck, a 2009 Ford F-150, pulled onto Route 7. Music played loudly through the speakers. Windows were down. Inside the cab, conversation overlapped with laughter. Nora, still blindfolded, asked where they were going and whether the groom would believe the performance. None of the occupants were focused on the road for long. The driver had been drinking steadily since late afternoon. Later testing would show his blood alcohol concentration measured 0.14. He had driven Route 7 many times and believed he knew its turns instinctively. Approximately half a mile from the venue, the road curved sharply to the left. The reflective marker indicating the bend was partially obscured by overgrowth. There were no streetlights beyond the venue entrance. The truck approached the curve at a speed investigators later determined was unsafe for the roadway conditions. As the driver recognized the bend, he braked abruptly and turned the steering wheel left. The sudden deceleration shifted weight onto the front tires while reducing traction at the rear. The truck's rear end began to slide. The vehicle crossed the center line briefly before drifting off the right shoulder. The front tires struck the embankment at an angle, lifting the passenger side and initiating a rollover. The truck rotated once before landing upside down in a drainage ditch. Glass shattered outward. 2 passengers unbuckled and exited through broken windows. The driver crawled out moments later. Nora remained in the rear seat. She had not been wearing a seatbelt. The blindfold ribbon was still partially tied across her eyes. A passing motorist came upon the overturned vehicle and called 911. Emergency responders arrived approximately 9 minutes later. Nora was extricated from the truck and CPR was initiated at the roadside before transport to a nearby hospital. She was pronounced dead at 11:18 p.m. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be blunt force trauma to the chest and head sustained during the rollover. Investigators concluded that alcohol impairment and excessive speed were primary contributing factors. No mechanical defects were found in the vehicle. The driver was later charged with second-degree manslaughter. The 3 surviving passengers were treated for non-life-threatening injuries and released. It was September 22, 2014, in Newport Beach, California. The 80-foot luxury yacht was anchored 2 miles offshore in calm waters, providing an exclusive venue for the wedding reception of tech entrepreneur Michael Santos. Marcus Delacroix was 31, an investment banker and Michael's college roommate who had flown in from New York specifically for the celebration. The evening was perfect for a maritime celebration, with clear skies and comfortable temperatures as golden hour lighting cast warm shadows across the yacht's teak deck surfaces. Marcus suffered from severe contact dermatitis and allergic reactions to industrial cleaning chemicals, particularly quaternary ammonium compounds commonly used in commercial cleaning products. The condition was well documented in his medical records, as he had experienced several severe reactions during his college years when exposed to cleaning supplies in dormitories, including one systemic reaction that required emergency treatment. In his current office environment, Marcus rarely encountered such chemicals, so he had not brought emergency medication like an EpiPen with him on the trip. That morning, the yacht had undergone professional detailing by a marine cleaning service. The crew used industrial-strength cleaners containing quaternary ammonium compounds to remove salt deposits and oxidation from all metal surfaces, including deck railings, hardware, and fixtures. The cleaning process was completed by 11 a.m., but the crew had not properly rinsed the chemical residue from the surfaces, particularly the upper deck railings, where guests would be socializing. Within 10 minutes of boarding, at 6:20 p.m., Marcus had mentioned feeling slight skin irritation on his hands to other guests, but he attributed the sensation to saltwater exposure and did not consider it cause for concern. The yacht's upper deck starboard railing provided an ideal location for photographs during the golden hour, and Marcus planned to take several pictures with the wedding party. Marcus placed both hands firmly on the freshly cleaned railing to steady himself for photos, his palms slightly damp with perspiration from the warm evening. The chemical residue remaining on the metal surface immediately began causing a contact reaction with his skin, the moisture and small cuts from recent sailing activities increasing absorption. Within minutes, a visible rash had appeared on both of his hands and was beginning to spread up his forearms. The reaction intensified gradually over the next several minutes. The rash spread to his elbows, and when Marcus unconsciously touched his face with his contaminated hands, the chemical transfer triggered facial swelling. He began experiencing difficulty breathing as his body's immune system responded to the chemical exposure. His airways began constricting, a clear indication that the reaction was progressing to anaphylactic shock. Marcus recognized the severity of his condition and called out for help, alerting other guests to his medical emergency. However, his blood pressure was dropping rapidly as anaphylactic shock set in. Without immediate access to epinephrine, his body was unable to counteract the severe allergic response. Within minutes, Marcus had collapsed on the deck, unable to breathe effectively as his airways continued to swell shut. Respiratory failure from the severe allergic reaction occurred, with his oxygen levels dropping to critical levels despite guests' attempts to provide assistance. Wedding guests called 911, but the yacht's offshore location complicated the emergency response. The Coast Guard dispatched a rescue vessel equipped with emergency epinephrine and advanced life support equipment. They arrived at the yacht's location and immediately administered epinephrine while preparing Marcus for transport to shore. Despite aggressive treatment, Marcus was pronounced dead from anaphylactic shock and respiratory failure. The investigation revealed comprehensive evidence supporting accidental death from chemical exposure. The yacht cleaning service provided records showing their use of quaternary ammonium-based cleaners that morning, while Marcus's medical records documented his known severe allergies to these compounds. Multiple witness statements described the progression of his reaction, and chemical residue samples from the railings tested positive for quaternary ammonium compounds. It was January 14, 2016, on a mountain lodge access road in Estes Park, Colorado. The afternoon temperature held at 28 degrees, with intermittent snow flurries creating a thin layer of ice on the winding asphalt. The narrow road descended at a moderate grade toward the lodge, with steep embankments on both sides. A passenger shuttle van had arrived to transport wedding guests and their luggage from the remote mountain venue back to town. The vehicle towed a small enclosed trailer loaded with suitcases and wedding equipment. The trailer lacked independent braking systems and relied entirely on the van's parking brake for stability. The trailer hitch showed visible signs of corrosion and wear from exposure to mountain weather conditions. Marnie Flug, a 40-year-old event coordination professional, had volunteered to oversee the luggage loading and guest departure process. She had known the bride, Sarah Kendrick, since their college years, when the two had been roommates and frequent hiking companions. When Sarah announced her engagement, Marnie had been among the first people she called. Known for her organizational skills, Marnie had spent the weekend ensuring that all aspects of Sarah's mountain wedding proceeded smoothly. The shuttle had stopped on a section of road with a mild downhill grade to allow guests to load their belongings. The driver had engaged the parking brake, but had not placed wheel chocks behind the trailer wheels. The icy road surface created additional challenges for maintaining vehicle stability. As guests retrieved their luggage, the weight distribution within the trailer shifted repeatedly. Suitcases and equipment had been loaded without systematic organization, creating an uneven load that placed varying stress on the hitch connection. The corroded hitch components had been weakened by repeated freeze-thaw cycles and road salt exposure. Marnie positioned herself behind the trailer to direct the final loading sequence and ensure that all items were properly secured before departure. Her location allowed her to coordinate with both the driver and guests while maintaining visual oversight. The hitch failure occurred suddenly when the accumulated stress from the shifting load exceeded the weakened connection point. The corroded metal components separated completely, releasing the trailer from the shuttle van. Without independent brakes, the trailer immediately began rolling backward down the icy grade, gaining momentum as it moved away from the stationary vehicle. Marnie heard the distinctive sound of the hitch separation and turned toward the noise. The trailer was already moving at significant speed when she attempted to step aside. The heavy trailer struck her legs and pelvis area, knocking her to the ground and pulling her beneath the moving vehicle. The trailer continued rolling downhill for approximately 150 feet, dragging Marnie along the icy asphalt surface before coming to rest against a roadside embankment. The sustained contact with the road surface and the weight of the loaded trailer caused severe traumatic injuries to her lower body and internal organs. Multiple witnesses immediately called emergency services, while others attempted first aid. The remote mountain location, combined with icy road conditions, delayed paramedic arrival to 28 minutes. They immediately began advanced trauma protocols. Despite aggressive treatment efforts, Marnie was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death was multiple traumatic injuries resulting from being struck and dragged by the runaway trailer. Colorado State Patrol investigators documented the hitch failure and examined the corroded components. The investigation revealed that metal fatigue and environmental corrosion had compromised the hitch assembly's structural integrity. The final report concluded that equipment failure due to inadequate maintenance was the primary factor in the fatal accident. It was July 22, 2017, in shallow waters off the southeastern coast of Florida. The afternoon was partly cloudy, with temperatures reaching 84 degrees Fahrenheit under light surface winds. Water temperature measured 79 degrees Fahrenheit with good visibility conditions. An artificial reef structure sat at 25-foot depth with moderate current during high tourist season. Lauren Nash was 29, a marine biology graduate student with advanced scuba certification after 2 years of regular diving. Her boyfriend, Emerson Vale, 31, was an insurance adjuster from Orlando with basic scuba certification obtained 6 months prior. Nash had planned an underwater proposal at the artificial reef site documented in dive logs and camera preparation notes recovered during the investigation. Nash had arranged for professional dive equipment but encountered problems the day before when their primary gear experienced malfunctions. The regulator showing signs of wear belonged to Nash and was not part of the dive shop's rental inventory. Staff advised replacing it with a rental unit or postponing the dive, but Nash declined. Dive shop records and staff statements later confirmed that Nash declined postponement despite documented equipment concerns. Her plan involved revealing an engagement ring in a waterproof container while Vale filmed the moment using an underwater camera housing. She had practiced the reveal sequence during previous dives and coordinated hand signals with Vale for optimal filming angles. The backup regulator made audible hissing sounds during the pre-dive check, with visible air bubbles escaping from the connection points. Pre-dive checks showed continued preparation despite visible regulator leakage and equipment concerns noted by both divers. The dive unfolded at the artificial reef site 25 feet below the surface, where coral formations created an ideal backdrop for the proposal. The artificial structure consisted of concrete modules that provided numerous cavities where colorful fish congregated. Nash and Vale descended according to plan, reaching the reef structure without initial problems. Nash had been underwater for several minutes, positioning herself near a large coral formation while preparing to retrieve the ring container when her primary regulator began delivering inconsistent airflow. Nash attempted to signal Vale while switching to her backup regulator, pointing to her primary regulator and making the standard hand signal for equipment problems. She discovered the backup regulator had entered a free flow condition, producing a continuous rush of bubbles from worn seals previously documented. The uncontrolled release of air rapidly depleted her remaining air supply and obscured her vision underwater. Nash's hand signals became increasingly frantic as she attempted to communicate the severity of the equipment failure. Vale, several feet away filming and slow to recognize the severity of the emergency due to his limited training, did not offer his alternate regulator before Nash began her ascent. Nash signaled a critical equipment failure and indicated the need to surface. Streams of air bubbles escaped continuously from her damaged regulator, creating a visible trail in the water as her air supply depleted rapidly. As Nash attempted to ascend, the uncontrolled free flow created a dense curtain of bubbles that disoriented her and disrupted her ascent. Her breathing became rapid and shallow as her air supply depleted. With little usable air remaining and her ascent slowed by confusion and panic, Nash lost consciousness at approximately 18 feet below the surface. Vale managed to reach the surface and signaled the dive boat captain, who immediately called for emergency response. Rescue divers reached Nash as quickly as possible, but were unable to revive her despite immediate resuscitation attempts. Investigation recovered both regulators, which showed the wear problems dive shop staff had documented. Nash's dive log showed she had been warned about equipment issues. Emergency response records documented the timeline and rescue efforts. Autopsy findings confirmed death by drowning due to equipment malfunction. The case was classified as accidental death, with investigation concluding Nash had been warned about equipment issues, but chose to proceed despite safety concerns.
It was October 14th, 2017, at a hotel in Portland, Oregon, when 72-year-old Dorothy Callahan attended her grandson's wedding reception. Dorothy had been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 40 years earlier and managed her condition with insulin injections and careful monitoring of her blood sugar levels. She worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm and lived independently in a condo 15 minutes from the hotel. Her diabetes management had been excellent for years, with few complications. The wedding had begun with a ceremony at 2 o'clock. followed by a cocktail hour and seated dinner. Dorothy had eaten a light breakfast that morning and had taken her regular insulin dose at 8 o'clock, as she always did. She brought her glucose monitor and emergency supplies in her purse, but placed the purse under her chair during the reception and did not check her levels throughout the event. She was having too much fun to think about her routine. The reception was lively, with music, dancing, and multiple courses of food served over 3 hours. Dorothy was excited to celebrate with her grandson and became caught up in conversations with relatives she had not seen in years. She danced twice, gave a toast during dinner, and drank 2 glasses of champagne. The combination of physical activity, alcohol, and irregular eating disrupted her normal routine. She ate less than usual because she was talking so much. By 7 o'clock, Dorothy began feeling slightly lightheaded, but attributed it to the excitement and noise of the celebration. She did not recognize the early symptoms of dropping blood sugar because her attention was focused on the festivities. She ate a piece of wedding cake, but did not consume enough carbohydrates to counteract the insulin still active in her system. The champagne had also affected her body's ability to regulate glucose. The reception concluded at 8:30. Dorothy said goodbye to family members, retrieved her purse, and walked to her car in the hotel parking garage. She drove home, a trip that normally took 12 minutes. When she arrived at her condo building, she parked in her assigned space and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. She was feeling increasingly tired, but thought she just needed rest. She entered her apartment at 9:05 and sat down on the sofa, intending to rest before preparing for bed. Her blood sugar had continued to drop throughout the drive home. Within minutes, she experienced confusion, rapid heartbeat, and severe weakness. She tried to reach for her phone on the coffee table but lost consciousness before making the call. Dorothy lived alone, and no one knew she was in distress. Her body's glucose level continued to fall during the night, reaching dangerously low levels that caused brain function to deteriorate. By morning, she had been in severe hypoglycemic shock for over 8 hours. Her brain was being starved of the glucose it needed to function. A co-worker who was supposed to meet Dorothy for Sunday brunch called her cell phone repeatedly starting at 11 o'clock, but received no answer. Concerned, the co-worker drove to Dorothy's condo and asked the building manager to check on her. They entered the apartment at 1:15 and found Dorothy unconscious on the sofa. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics arrived and found her unresponsive with no detectable blood sugar reading on their monitor. They administered emergency glucose and began transport to the hospital, but Dorothy never regained consciousness. She was pronounced dead at 2:40 that afternoon. The cause of death was determined to be severe hypoglycemia, leading to cardiac arrest and brain death. What seemed like a joyful celebration disrupted a careful medical routine with deadly consequences.
It was October 15th, 2017. Rochester, New York was experiencing a mild autumn afternoon with temperatures hovering around 68 degrees. The outdoor wedding venue sat on a private estate surrounded by manicured lawns and mature oak trees, still holding their fall colors. Inside the reception hall, roughly 80 guests had gathered around white-clothed tables, arranged in a semicircle facing the head table where the newlyweds sat. Victor Glint was 38 years old and worked in delivery logistics for a regional transportation company. He had known the groom since high school and had been chosen as best man months earlier. Victor was known among friends for being easygoing and reliable, the kind of person who showed up early and stayed late to help clean up. He took his role seriously and had spent the morning coordinating with vendors and keeping the timeline on track. He had rehearsed a short speech the night before and seemed genuinely excited to celebrate his friend's marriage. The reception had been running smoothly for just over an hour. Dinner service had finished, and the DJ announced it was time for the first official toast. Victor stood and moved toward the gift table, where several bottles of champagne had been placed earlier. He selected one that had been sitting near the window for the past 90 minutes, warmed slightly by afternoon sunlight streaming through the glass. The bottle felt warm in his hands. Guests began gathering closer, many pulling out their phones to record the moment. The atmosphere was cheerful and relaxed as conversations quieted in anticipation. Victor held the bottle at chest height and made a joke about needing to wake it up first. He shook it a few times while smiling at the crowd. Several people laughed, and a few called out playfully. He began loosening the wire cage with his thumb while the bottle remained angled toward himself, roughly 18 inches from his face. The pressure inside had increased from both the shaking and the temperature change. creating a hazardous internal buildup that Victor did not recognize. With a sudden loud pop, the cork blasted free. It shot forward in a straight line and struck Victor in his right eye with violent force. The impact snapped his head backward, and he staggered 2 steps before his hip caught the edge of the table behind him. He dropped to the floor, clutching his face as blood quickly spread across his cheek. Guests nearby saw immediate swelling and heavy bleeding around the eye. Someone screamed for help while another person called emergency services. Guests moved toward him as others cleared space for responders. Paramedics arrived within 9 minutes. Victor was semi-conscious but disoriented, showing severe facial trauma and neurological distress. They transported him to a nearby hospital, where imaging later revealed the cork's impact had fractured the orbital bone and caused significant intracranial bleeding and brain swelling consistent with traumatic brain injury. His condition deteriorated despite emergency treatment, and he died later that evening from complications of severe intracranial hemorrhage. Police collected the cork, the wire cage, and the bottle from the scene. Multiple witnesses provided statements confirming the sequence of events, including the shaking and the angle at which Victor had been holding the bottle. Investigators documented witness accounts, the position of the bottle, and the sequence of events described by guests. The death was ruled accidental, with the medical examiner listing traumatic brain injury with intracranial hemorrhage following blunt orbital impact from a champagne cork as the cause. The reception ended immediately, and remaining bottles were removed from all tables as a precaution. The venue later revised its alcohol service protocols and staff training procedures. It was September 12, 2015, at a historic hotel in Charleston, South Carolina. The ballroom occupied the 2nd floor, with additional seating on the 3rd. The only operational elevator in the building dated back to 1911, restored but original in structure, with a posted limit of 4 passengers or 800 pounds. Staff reminded guests of the limit throughout the evening. Marcus Hale was 31 years old. He worked as a project coordinator for a logistics firm in Colombia and had debated skipping the reception because of the drive. The groom had called him personally a week earlier and asked him to give a toast. They had started at the company the same month and had eaten lunch together nearly every workday for 6 years. Marcus rewrote his speech 3 times that morning. He drove to Charleston alone and arrived just before the ceremony began. By 9:45 p.m., the reception had split across floors. The stairs connecting them were narrow and steep. Guests who had been drinking for several hours began gathering near the elevator instead. The car moved slowly, taking nearly a minute to travel between floors. A line formed in the lobby. Marcus stood with 4 co-workers near the front of the queue. Someone ahead mentioned the wait could be 20 minutes. When the gate slid open, 4 guests stepped out. Marcus looked inside. The car was small but not cramped. He stepped in first. 2 co-workers followed. Another hesitated, then entered. A 5th squeezed in as the gate closed. 6 total. There was no overload sensor on the control panel, only the posted weight limit on the wall behind them. The gate latched, and the elevator began its slow ascent. The ascent was slower than before. Marcus felt the vibration through the soles of his shoes. At roughly 8 feet above the lobby floor, the car jolted. The motor strained audibly. Then the elevator stopped without warning. The abrupt stop threw the occupants backward as the car shuddered against the guide rails. Marcus, who had been standing near the rear corner, struck the back wall and then collapsed to the floor as the elevator settled into place. The lights flickered but did not go out. 1 co-worker slid down the side panel, stunned, while another steadied himself against the railing. The car hung suspended between floors, the lobby ceiling visible through the gap below the doors. Someone tried to force the gate open, but it would not move. The car hung between floors. Marcus lay on his back, eyes open but unfocused. Blood was visible beneath his head where it had struck the floor. Hotel staff were alerted immediately, and emergency services were called at 9:58 p.m. A manager arrived at the shaft door below and called upward to ask if anyone was injured. 5 voices answered. Marcus did not. Firefighters accessed the car from above, opening the ceiling hatch and lifting the occupants out one at a time. Marcus was removed last. CPR was initiated before he was fully transferred from the shaft and continued en route to a local hospital. Despite sustained resuscitation efforts, Marcus Hale was pronounced dead at 11:52 p.m. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be severe head and cervical spine trauma resulting from blunt impact during the abrupt elevator stop. Investigators concluded that the elevator had exceeded its posted weight capacity at the time of the incident. The emergency braking mechanism functioned as designed, halting the ascent under strain, but the sudden stop caused occupants to lose balance within the confined space. The hotel temporarily suspended elevator operations pending inspection. Civil litigation followed. No criminal charges were filed. It was June 9, 2018, in Charleston, South Carolina. The historic mansion had served as a wedding venue for over 50 years. Its antebellum architecture and gardens providing an elegant backdrop for ceremonies throughout the South. Natalie Cross was 26, a marketing director known for her trusting nature and ability to see the best in people. The humid summer evening was warm as preparations continued for the 8 p.m. ceremony, with final touches being completed in the mansion's third-floor bridal suite. She had recently become engaged to David Richardson, who had previously dated her maid of honor, Jessica Palmer, during their college years 3 years earlier. Natalie was unaware that Jessica had never fully accepted their breakup and still harbored romantic feelings for David. The relationship between Jessica and David had lasted 8 months before he ended it, citing their different life goals. Jessica had maintained contact with both of them throughout their subsequent relationship, positioning herself as a supportive friend while privately hoping for reconciliation. The bridal suite featured a deep marble bathtub holding approximately 18 inches of water and filled with decorative rose petals, creating an elegant backdrop for pre-ceremony photographs. Most bridesmaids were downstairs greeting early arriving guests, leaving Natalie alone with Jessica for final dress adjustments and touch-ups. Jessica had volunteered specifically for this task, claiming she wanted to ensure everything was perfect for her friend's special day. Jessica entered the bathroom, where Natalie was applying final makeup touches. The conversation began casually, with Jessica commenting on wedding day nerves and the excitement of the evening ahead. Their discussion shifted to how Natalie and David first met, with Natalie sharing details about their early courtship. The tone changed dramatically when Jessica revealed she still loved David and had never stopped hoping he would return to her. Natalie expressed shock at this revelation, immediately attempting to comfort Jessica and suggest they discuss the situation after the ceremony. Jessica's demeanor became increasingly agitated as she described watching Natalie and David's relationship develop while pretending to be supportive. Jessica snapped emotionally and pushed Natalie backward toward the bathtub. Natalie fell into the water-filled tub, her wedding dress becoming immediately saturated and heavy. Before Natalie could stand up, Jessica positioned herself over the tub and forced Natalie's head underwater. Natalie fought violently against the submersion, managing to scratch Jessica's arms and face during the struggle. However, the weight of her saturated dress and Jessica's positioning made it impossible for her to gain leverage to escape. Despite her desperate efforts, Natalie drowned from forced submersion. Jessica waited several minutes before calling for help, claiming she had found Natalie unconscious in the bathtub after an apparent slip and fall. Paramedics arrived, but were unable to resuscitate Natalie. She was pronounced dead from drowning. The investigation revealed significant evidence contradicting Jessica's account. The autopsy found no head trauma that would indicate an accidental fall. Jessica's fingerprints were discovered on Natalie's shoulders, consistent with holding her underwater. Scratch marks on Jessica's arms matched defensive wounds found under Natalie's fingernails. A review of Jessica's phone records revealed hundreds of text messages expressing obsession with David dating back 3 years, including recent messages about stopping the wedding. Witness statements from other bridesmaids describe Jessica's unusual behavior throughout the day. Water found in Natalie's lungs confirmed drowning as the cause of death. It was February 18th, 2017, in a community hall in Bakersfield, California. The modest venue buzzed with anticipation as evening guests arrived for the reception celebration. Outside, temperatures had dropped to a comfortable 52 degrees, while inside, the hall's concrete floors reflected warm overhead lighting that created an intimate atmosphere. The centerpiece of the evening was an innovative LED dance floor system installed earlier that day. 16 modular panels, each measuring 4 feet square, had been assembled to create a 16 by 16 foot illuminated surface. A 21-year-old part-time assistant working with the DJ company had spent the afternoon connecting electrical components, working unsupervised after the licensed technician failed to arrive. He ran power cables beneath panels and secured connections with standard electrical tape. Lotta Brinks, a 28-year-old office administrator, moved through the crowd, greeting guests and ensuring everything proceeded smoothly. Known for her attention to detail and passion for incorporating modern elements into traditional events, she had specifically requested the lighted floor feature months earlier. Her methodical planning approach had covered most reception aspects, though technical installation details were left to the audio equipment crew. Throughout the cocktail hour, the dance area served as a gathering point where guests admired the technology while holding drinks. Multiple spills occurred as people leaned over panels to examine the LED system, with liquid finding its way between panel seams. Moisture slowly accumulated around connection points where individual panels linked to the main power supply. The power distribution system consisted of strips placed directly on concrete, feeding 120-volt current to LED arrays. No ground fault circuit interrupter had been installed, and connections between panels relied on exposed metal contacts vulnerable to moisture infiltration. As the formal reception began, Lotta prepared for the first dance by removing her shoes, intending to experience the smooth panel surface directly. Several guests had also gone barefoot, following the modern trend of casual dancing. The DJ activated special lighting as she stepped onto the central area. The electrical fault, developed when accumulated liquid, created a conductive path through a compromised junction. Current flowed through metal panel trim, which became energized at full line voltage. Lotta's bare feet contacted the wet area while her hands simultaneously touched electrified trim as she moved across the surface. The 120-volt current caused immediate involuntary muscle contractions, preventing her from releasing contact with energized components. The current passed foot to hand across her chest, directly through the heart. She fell backward onto panels, her body maintaining the electrical circuit. Distinctive burn marks appeared on her feet and palm where current had entered and exited. Multiple witnesses observed the incident and immediately called for power disconnection. A guest with electrical experience located and threw the main breaker, cutting power to the dance floor system. CPR was initiated immediately while emergency services were summoned. Emergency medical personnel arrived within 8 minutes and continued advanced life support measures for 25 minutes before declaring Lotta deceased. The official determination was electrocution caused by electrical current passing through her body. Fire department investigators documented moisture contamination in multiple electrical connections and absence of required safety protection devices. The venue was cleared and the entire LED system dismantled for evidence collection. Investigation concluded that liquid infiltration, combined with inadequate electrical safety measures, created the fatal hazard. The final report identified improper installation methods and missing ground fault protection as direct causes of the electrocution. It was May 17, 2018, at a roadside wildlife attraction in East Texas. The hot afternoon reached 89 degrees Fahrenheit with high humidity under light winds. Large fenced enclosures housed various rescued animals, including 3 adult tigers. The privately run roadside facility operated with minimal staff during weekday hours, with feeding scheduled for late afternoon when animals were typically most active. Alexis Ward was 31, a content creator who specialized in adventure photography. Her boyfriend, Camden Cross, 33, was an experienced auto mechanic. Ward planned to propose to Cross by entering a tiger enclosure, apparently inspired by videos she had seen of people interacting with large cats. Ward had contacted the facility claiming interest in volunteer work, gaining information about daily routines and enclosure layouts. She planned to enter the tiger enclosure during what she believed was a calm period before feeding time. Staff records showed she had asked specific questions about animal schedules and facility access. During their visit, facility staff provided standard safety information about animal behavior and enclosure security, explaining the territorial nature of the tigers and their heightened aggression during feeding periods. Staff members warned about the dangers of entering enclosures and described the animals' unpredictable responses to unfamiliar humans. Ward asked detailed questions about feeding schedules and staff routines while appearing distracted during safety explanations. The incident occurred inside a tiger enclosure consisting of 3 connected pens totaling approximately 2,400 square feet with concrete flooring and chain link fencing. The enclosure housed 2 adult females and 1 male, all rescue animals with unknown backgrounds and varying levels of human socialization. In the late afternoon, Ward climbed an internal 8-foot service fence within the enclosure and entered the tiger pen while staff were preparing feeds in another area, with Cross remaining outside the barrier and filming with his phone. The tigers, anticipating feeding time, immediately responded to Ward's presence in their territory. All 3 animals became alert and focused on her as she entered their space. Ward remained stationary while attempting to set up decorative items for her proposal. Cross shouted warnings from outside the fence while continuing to film. The nearest tiger, one of the adult females, approached Ward within moments of her entry. Ward turned toward Cross and waved, apparently unaware of the animal's proximity. The tiger attacked without warning, delivering a fatal bite to Ward's neck area. The attack was brief but caused severe trauma. Ward lost consciousness immediately. Staff discovered the situation during feeding rounds and immediately initiated emergency deterrent procedures, using noise and visual stimuli to break the animal's focus before securing them. Cross was escorted from the premises by facility personnel while emergency services were contacted. Emergency responders arrived, but Ward had already died from her injuries. Investigation recovered Ward's phone, which contained saved videos of people interacting with large cats and social media posts about unique proposal ideas. Cross's phone footage documented her unauthorized entry and the attack. Text messages between Ward and Cross revealed her proposal plans, with Ward expressing that she had seen people do this safely and wanted to create something unforgettable. Security footage confirmed the sequence of events. Medical examination determined the cause of death was massive trauma from the tiger attack, with fatal injuries occurring within moments of the initial contact. The case was ruled accidental death due to unauthorized entry into a dangerous animal enclosure. No charges were filed against the facility, as investigators determined that proper safety protocols and warnings had been in place. The facility implemented additional security measures following the incident, including enhanced perimeter fencing and increased staff monitoring during public hours.
It was June 16, 2019, at a venue in Nashville, Tennessee. The venue was a popular outdoor space that sat on 7 acres of landscaped grounds along a river. The main reception area was a stone patio surrounded by gardens and a wide lawn. 30-year-old Caleb Turner arrived for his nephew's evening wedding reception. Caleb worked as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company and had taken the afternoon off to attend the celebration. He had driven 3 hours from Knoxville that morning to be there. He was close with his nephew and had helped the couple plan some of the logistics for their wedding day. The couple had hired a professional pyrotechnics company to provide a fireworks display at 9 o'clock, time to go off with the first dance. The display had cost nearly $3,000 and was meant to be the highlight of the evening. The fireworks crew had set up their launch tubes on the lawn about 150 feet from the patio, positioned to fire upward over the river. Safety barriers had been placed around the launch area, and guests had been asked to remain behind a marked line during the show. The crew consisted of 3 licensed pyrotechnicians who had performed similar displays at dozens of weddings. Caleb had been at the reception since 5:30 and was standing near the buffet table with other family members when the display began. The first 3 fireworks launched correctly, rising high into the night sky before exploding in bursts of red and gold. The 4th firework, a large shell designed to create a spreading pattern, was loaded into tube number 7. When it ignited, the tube had already shifted several degrees from vertical due to ground settling that the crew had not noticed during setup. The soft earth beneath the launch platform had compressed unevenly under the weight of the equipment. The shell launched at an angle instead of straight up. It traveled horizontally across the lawn at high speed, passing over the safety barrier and into the crowd. Caleb was holding a glass of champagne and talking to his sister when the projectile struck him directly in the chest. The impact occurred before the shell's timed explosion, but the force of the solid projectile traveling at that velocity caused massive internal trauma. He dropped to the ground immediately. Several guests nearby rushed to help him while others screamed and moved away from the launch area. The pyrotechnics crew activated their emergency shutdown and called for medical assistance. Caleb was not breathing and had no detectable pulse. CPR was started within seconds and continued for 12 minutes until paramedics arrived. They transported him to a medical center with ongoing resuscitation efforts, but he was pronounced dead 25 minutes after arrival. The medical examiner determined that the shell had caused cardiac rupture and massive hemorrhaging that would have been instantly fatal. The wedding ended immediately. The venue was evacuated, and local fire marshals launched an investigation into the incident. The pyrotechnics company's license was suspended, and the launch crew was questioned about their setup and safety procedures. The venue was also shut down temporarily, and later prohibited any form of fireworks display on the property. What started as a display of fireworks ended in the worst way possible.
It was July 29, 2017, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A wedding reception was underway inside a mid-size banquet hall with polished hardwood floors, where about 100 guests gathered around the dance floor for the couple's first dance. Decorative metal lantern fixtures hung roughly 11 feet above the center of the performance area. Earlier during cocktail hour, drinks had been spilled on the floor. Staff wiped up the visible liquid, but small, damp patches remained under the ambient lighting, leaving slick areas that were difficult to see. Xander Krell was 29 years old and worked as a fitness instructor at a local gym. He was the groom and had been actively involved in planning the reception entertainment. Xander was athletic and confident, known among friends for his enthusiasm. He and his bride had spent weeks choreographing their first dance, which was designed to end with a dramatic running front flip that Xander would perform as the music reached its climax. The reception had been progressing smoothly when the DJ announced it was time for the couple's first dance. Guests formed a circle around the hardwood floor, many holding up their phones to record the performance. The couple took their positions in the center as the music began. They moved through their choreographed routine flawlessly, building toward the finale. As the music approached its peak, Xander stepped back toward the edge of the circle to begin his running approach for the front flip. The guests cheered in anticipation as he prepared for the dramatic ending. He had performed this exact sequence multiple times during rehearsals and felt confident about the timing and distance required. Xander sprinted forward across the dance floor, building speed for his takeoff. As he planted his right foot to launch into the flip, His shoe made contact with one of the small, damp patches that remained from the earlier spills. The reduced traction caused his foot to slip slightly, shortening his takeoff and reducing the height of his jump. The shortened takeoff caused him to rotate lower than expected. Instead of reaching the height he had achieved in rehearsal, Xander's head struck the decorative metal lantern fixture hanging above the center of the dance floor. The impact disrupted his rotation completely, causing him to fall almost vertically toward the hardwood surface below. Xander struck the floor head first with his full body weight behind the impact. The combination of the failed flip attempt and the hard surface created a devastating collision. Guests immediately stopped cheering as they realized something had gone terribly wrong. He remained motionless on the dance floor, showing no signs of consciousness, with blood visible near his head. Several guests with medical training rushed to assist while someone called emergency services. They found Xander unresponsive, with signs of severe injury and abnormal positioning that suggested serious spinal trauma. No one attempted to move him due to the apparent severity. The music stopped and the reception hall fell silent. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They found Xander unconscious with indications of severe head and neck trauma. He was transported to a nearby trauma center where imaging revealed catastrophic injuries to both his cervical spine and brain. Despite immediate surgical intervention, he was pronounced dead several hours after arrival. Police investigators documented the scene, photographing the damp floor areas and measuring the height of the lantern fixture. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was traumatic brain injury and cervical spine fracture. The death was ruled accidental. The reception ended immediately, and the venue later implemented policies restricting acrobatic performances and requiring safety clearance of the dance floor before staged routines. It was the evening of Saturday, October 6, 2018, outside a banquet hall in Atlanta, Georgia. The reception had ended shortly after 11 p.m. Guests filtered into the parking lot in small groups, retrieving coats from vehicles and saying extended goodbyes near the entrance doors. The lot held approximately 50 spaces arranged in 3 narrow rows with a single travel lane down the center. 2 overhead light fixtures illuminated the area. Staff later reported that one of the lights had been flickering intermittently for several weeks. Evelyn Marsh was 63 years old. She had traveled from Savannah 2 days before the ceremony to assist with preparations. A retired school librarian, she had spent the morning arranging centerpieces and the afternoon coordinating seating changes. Throughout the reception, she moved between tables, helping elderly relatives locate seats and keeping children occupied during speeches. Family members described her as steady and attentive, often placing herself where she was most useful. When the reception ended, she exited through the main doors to wait near the curb for her nephew to bring the car forward. Vehicle traffic in the lot was unstructured. Guests departed at different times, some pulling forward, others reversing from tight spaces. There was no attendant directing flow after 10 p.m. Several vehicles in the rear rows required multi-point turns to exit. Evelyn walked along the edge of the central travel lane, staying close to parked cars to avoid moving traffic. At approximately 11:18 p.m., a guest parked 3 rows back entered his sedan and started the engine. Surveillance footage later reviewed by investigators showed the vehicle's reverse lights activate as he shifted into reverse. The space behind him was partially obstructed by 2 larger SUVs parked on either side, limiting his rear visibility. As he began backing out, his steering angle caused the rear of the sedan to swing wider than expected into the central lane. Witnesses stated that Evelyn stepped from between 2 parked vehicles into the travel lane at the same moment the sedan was reversing. The lighting in that section of the lot was uneven due to the flickering overhead fixture. The driver continued backing at a steady pace, consistent with normal parking lot movement. There was no evidence of sudden acceleration. The rear bumper struck Evelyn at hip height, knocking her backward onto the pavement. Her head struck the asphalt as she fell. The vehicle vehicle continued moving for several feet before bystanders shouted and motioned for the driver to stop. He applied the brakes and exited the vehicle immediately. Several guests reached Evelyn within seconds. She was lying on her back and not responding. Someone called 911 while others directed traffic away from the scene. The driver remained on site. Paramedics arrived approximately 6 minutes after the call. Evelyn was unresponsive with no detectable pulse at the scene. She was transported to a local hospital where resuscitation efforts continued in the trauma bay. She was pronounced dead at 1:09 a.m. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be blunt force trauma consistent with pedestrian impact and secondary head injury from striking the pavement. Toxicology reports showed no alcohol or impairing substances in the driver's system. Investigators concluded that limited rear visibility, uneven lighting, and failure to adequately check surroundings while reversing were contributing factors. The driver was cited for improper backing and failure to exercise due care. No criminal charges were filed. Following the incident, the venue replaced the malfunctioning light fixture and reviewed parking lot lighting coverage. It was December 15, 2013, in Savannah, Georgia. The historic mansion's garden ceremony site was adorned with winter flowers and elegant drapery, creating a fairy tale setting despite the cool afternoon temperature. Centuries-old magnolia trees provided a natural canopy over the outdoor altar, their glossy leaves catching the afternoon sunlight. Rachel Donovan was 24, an elementary school teacher known throughout her school district for perfectionism and maintaining impossibly high standards for herself and her students. The afternoon was bright and clear, with sunlight illuminating the garden altar where 80 guests had gathered for the 3:30 p.m. ceremony. For the past 3 months, she had pursued an extreme weight loss regimen with the singular goal of achieving what she considered the perfect wedding day appearance, increasing the restriction to 600 calories daily in the final month before the wedding. Rachel's diet consisted of approximately 800 calories per day for the first 2 months, then 600 calories in the final month, primarily meal replacement shakes and supplements. She had lost 45 pounds since her engagement, dropping from 155 pounds to 110 pounds through severe calorie restriction, diet pills, and excessive exercise routines that often exceeded 2 hours daily. Her family and friends had expressed concern about her dramatic weight loss and increasingly pale complexion in the weeks leading to the wedding. Despite experiencing frequent dizzy spells, chronic fatigue, and intermittent nausea, Rachel attributed these symptoms to wedding stress and refused medical evaluation. On the morning of her wedding, she had refused to eat breakfast, claiming she needed to ensure her dress fit perfectly for the ceremony. Her goal was to weigh exactly 110 pounds when she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 3:30 p.m. with 80 guests seated in the mansion's garden. Rachel began her walk down the aisle, though several guests later noted she appeared unsteady on her feet and required assistance from her father to maintain balance. The ceremony commenced, but Rachel was visibly swaying during the exchange of vows. Rachel began experiencing severe abdominal cramping that she attempted to conceal from guests. The pain was caused by gastric ulcers that had developed from months of extreme dieting and regular diet pill consumption. Nausea began as dehydration and malnutrition finally overwhelmed her body's ability to function. Rachel attempted to continue the ceremony despite feeling increasingly ill, not wanting to disrupt the perfect wedding she had planned. However, she vomited bright red blood onto her white wedding dress in full view of all guests, indicating that her gastric ulcers had begun rupturing. As multiple ulcers ruptured simultaneously under the stress, severe electrolyte imbalances from months of malnutrition triggered dangerous cardiac arrhythmias. She collapsed onto the altar steps from hemorrhagic shock as her weakened heart struggled to maintain circulation. Guests immediately called 911 and paramedics arrived. Rachel was transported to a local medical center where emergency physicians attempted to stabilize her condition through IV fluids and blood transfusions. However, the damage from months of extreme malnutrition was too severe. Rachel was pronounced dead from hemorrhagic shock and cardiac arrhythmias caused by severe electrolyte imbalances. The autopsy revealed the extent of her self-imposed starvation, with evidence of severe malnutrition affecting her heart, liver, and digestive system, along with multiple ruptured gastric ulcers. The investigation uncovered Rachel's detailed diet journal, documenting her extreme calorie restriction over 3 months, with severe escalation in the final month. Medical records showed her 45-pound weight loss and declining health indicators that had gone unaddressed. Witness statements from family and friends described her obsessive behavior regarding weight loss and appearance. Empty containers of diet pills and laxatives were found in her apartment. It was June 11th, 2015, at a working ranch outside Cheyenne, Wyoming. The late afternoon sun beat down on the dusty property where cattle grazed in distant pastures, and the scent of hay mixed with dry summer air. Temperature held steady at 84 degrees with minimal cloud cover, creating ideal conditions for the outdoor reception planned around the ranch's rustic charm. The celebration took place in a cleared area near the main barn, where folding tables had been arranged for buffet dinner. 2 saddled horses, a bay mare and chestnut gelding, stood tethered to a wooden post approximately 15 feet from the food service area. The animals were included as part of the Western-themed atmosphere, though no designated handler remained present to monitor their behavior. Gully Thrope, a 49-year-old cousin of the bride, had volunteered to assist with reception logistics throughout the evening. Known among family members for his helpful nature and willingness to take on practical tasks, Gully had spent the afternoon moving chairs and coordinating with catering staff. His background in manual labor made him a natural choice for handling the physical aspects of event setup. As dinner service began, the DJ increased music volume to accommodate conversation among the growing crowd. The sound system, positioned near the buffet area, created steady, amplified music that carried across the open space. Children moved freely between tables and around the tethered horses, occasionally running past the animals while playing games. The bay mare had shown signs of agitation throughout the evening, repeatedly startling when guests walked behind her and shifting nervously when music volume increased. Her ears remained pinned back, and she had pulled against her tether several times when sudden movements occurred. The spacing between horses allowed minimal room for either animal to move away from perceived threats. Gully approached the buffet area from behind the horses, carrying used dinner plates back to the catering station. His path took him within 3 feet of the mare's hindquarters as he focused on balancing dishes and navigating around other guests. Music continued at elevated volume, while children played nearby, creating constant noise and movement. The triggering incident occurred when someone dropped a metal serving tray near the buffet table, creating a loud crash that echoed across the reception area. The bay mare, already on edge from ongoing stimulation, reacted instinctively to the sudden noise. She kicked backward with both hind legs in a defensive response, her hooves traveling in a powerful arc. Both hooves struck Gully simultaneously in the upper abdomen and lower rib cage, with full force of the animal's defensive kick. The impact threw him backward onto packed dirt surface, where he landed heavily. The blunt force trauma caused immediate internal injuries, including catastrophic liver and splenic rupture and internal bleeding not immediately visible to witnesses. Gully remained conscious for several minutes after impact, but showed signs of severe distress and was unable to stand. His breathing became labored, and he lost responsiveness as internal bleeding progressed. Several guests with medical training attempted assistance, while others called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within 14 minutes and immediately began advanced life support procedures. Despite their efforts, Gully was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the torso resulting in multiple organ rupture and internal hemorrhaging. Ranch personnel immediately removed both horses from the guest area. The reception was terminated and the incident area was cordoned off for investigation. Authorities documented animal positioning relative to guest traffic patterns and noted absence of adequate supervision during the event. It was September 8, 2015, in the wine country hills of Northern California. The morning was clear, with temperatures reaching 72 degrees Fahrenheit under light variable winds. Conditions were considered ideal for hot air balloon operations, with stable air layers over rolling hills dotted with oak trees and vineyards. Such weather regularly attracted balloon tours during peak tourist season, when flights typically launch shortly after sunrise to take advantage of calm, atmospheric conditions. River Caldwell was 26, a local adult education teacher, and Kira Valdez was 22, a nursing student. Both were active in community programs and had saved for months to afford a hot air balloon ride planned as part of their engagement. The flight was booked through a commercial operator offering scenic rides over the valley, with standard safety procedures and passenger briefings conducted prior to launch. River intended to propose during the flight. During the pre-flight safety briefing, he requested that instructions be delivered primarily in Spanish. Flight records and witness statements later noted repeated acknowledgement gestures during explanations of emergency procedures, basket positioning rules, and guidance on passenger movement during ascent and descent. Investigators later noted uncertainty regarding River's comprehension of several safety instructions provided during the briefing, particularly those related to remaining within designated areas of the basket. The balloon lifted off smoothly and climbed to cruising altitude above the valley floor. For approximately 20 minutes, the flight proceeded without incident as the balloon drifted with the prevailing winds. Passengers remained within the basket as instructed, and the pilot maintained a steady course over the terrain below. As the flight continued, River prepared to begin the proposal. At a significant altitude, River moved toward the edge of the basket as he initiated the proposal. Investigators later identified this area as outside recommended passenger positioning zones, especially during periods of altitude adjustment. The pilot observed River's position near the edge of the basket and issued urgent warnings while attempting to stabilize the balloon's altitude. Recorded radio transmissions later confirmed that emergency alerts were issued as the balloon encountered a sudden thermal shift. The envelope tilted briefly, causing a sharp change in basket orientation. Kira moved toward River in an attempt to steady his position as the balloon continued its controlled descent toward a safer altitude. While standing on a basket bench near the edge to gain a clearer view, River was thrown off balance as the basket tilted. The change in vertical movement and shifting balance caused instability within the basket. With his weight already shifted beyond the basket's interior boundary, the sudden tilt carried River's center of gravity past the rim, and he fell from the basket. Kira, positioned immediately behind him and reaching to pull him back, was pulled forward by the sudden shift and lost her balance, falling moments after him. The pilot immediately radioed for emergency response and applied a full burner blast in an attempt to stabilize the basket before executing an emergency landing in the nearest suitable area. Emergency responders were dispatched to the location beneath the balloon's flight path. Both River and Kira were located in an oak grove below, directly along the projected descent corridor. The investigation focused on communication issues during the safety briefing and passenger positioning during the flight. Recorded pilot communications confirmed repeated emergency alerts issued during the descent. Pilot statements confirmed that Kira moved toward River after he positioned himself near the basket edge, immediately preceding both falls. Medical examiners determined that the cause of death for both individuals was massive trauma sustained during the fall. Investigators ruled the deaths accidental, concluding that failure to follow safety positioning instructions, compounded by communication barriers during the briefing and sudden basket instability during a routine flight maneuver, led directly to the fatal outcome.
It was May 12, 2018, in Santa Barbara, California. The estate was a private property on 8 acres of hillside overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The ceremony had taken place on the lawn at 4 o'clock. and the reception was set up under a large white tent adjacent to the main house. 51-year-old Ana Perez arrived for her niece's outdoor wedding reception. Ana worked as a bilingual customer service supervisor for a healthcare company and had flown in from Phoenix 2 days earlier to help with wedding preparations. She was close with her niece and had volunteered to coordinate with the catering staff during the event. Ana had always been the family organizer, the person everyone relied on to make events run smoothly. The catering company had erected a smaller preparation tent behind the reception area, where they operated cooking equipment, refrigeration units, and food assembly stations. The preparation tent housed 2 commercial propane burners used for keeping serving dishes warm, connected to a 100-pound propane tank positioned outside the tent wall. The catering crew had set up the system that morning, but the connection fitting between the supply line and the tank had not been properly tightened. Throughout the afternoon, propane had been leaking slowly into the space beneath the tent. The leak was small enough that it went undetected during the crew's regular safety checks. Ana had been moving between the reception tent and the preparation area since 5:30, checking on food timing and helping coordinate service. At 7:40, she entered the catering tent to inform the staff that the main course should be served. 3 catering employees were inside, working at different stations. The leaked propane had created a concentration of gas near the floor, but the odor was masked by cooking smells and the outdoor airflow. When one of the crew members ignited a handheld torch to caramelize a dessert, the flame found the gas. The explosion was instantaneous. The force blew out the tent walls and sent the canopy structure upward before it collapsed. Ana was standing approximately 8 feet from the ignition point. She was thrown backward out of the tent and landed on the stone patio. The 3 catering employees were also injured by the blast, 2 suffering severe burns and 1 struck by flying equipment. The estate's event coordinator called emergency services immediately. Multiple ambulances and fire trucks responded within 10 minutes. Ana was unconscious with extensive burns across her upper body and face, as well as blast trauma to her chest. Paramedics began treatment and transported her to a hospital, but she died en route. The medical examiner determined that she had suffered fatal lung damage from the pressure wave and thermal burns to her airway. The reception ended at once, with guests sent home. The catering owner was questioned about safety measures. After an investigation found negligence, he was taken to court and ordered to pay damages and compensation for those impacted. What began as careful catering preparation ended in a catastrophic blast.
It was May 14th, 2016. Des Moines, Iowa was experiencing a mild spring afternoon with temperatures in the upper 60s and partly cloudy skies. The wedding venue was set up on a rural property featuring a large white vinyl reception tent measuring 40 feet in diameter. The tent had been completely zipped shut to protect the decorated interior from potential weather changes. 2 20-pound CO2 cylinders had been installed inside to power the beverage dispensing system. The tent contained round tables covered in white linens, a 3-tier wedding cake, and floral arrangements. The CO2 system had been installed that morning by a catering crew. One crew member had mentioned hearing a faint hissing sound from one of the regulators, but had not investigated further. Brielle Weil was 33 years old and worked in healthcare administration at a local dental practice. She was the bride and had been involved in planning every detail of her wedding day. Brielle was known for being meticulous and hands-on, preferring to personally check arrangements rather than delegate important tasks. She had stepped away from her bridal party preparation to make a final inspection of the reception setup before the ceremony began. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes when Brielle decided to enter the sealed tent alone for her final walkthrough. She wanted to ensure that all the table settings, centerpieces, and cake display met her expectations. The tent had been closed for several hours, and the faulty regulator had been slowly releasing CO2 into the enclosed space. The colorless and odorless gas had been building inside the sealed tent without any visible indication. As Brielle moved through the tent, checking various details, she was unknowingly breathing air with increasingly dangerous levels of carbon dioxide. The gas concentration had reached levels that began affecting her cognitive function and physical coordination. Security footage from outside the tent later showed her movements becoming slower and more unsteady as she progressed through her inspection. The CO2 continued to build inside the sealed environment, creating a deadly atmosphere that Brielle could not detect. Within several minutes of entering the tent, the rising gas levels began affecting her coordination and awareness. She became disoriented, and her motor skills deteriorated rapidly. The security video showed her stumbling near the tent entrance before collapsing approximately 6 feet from the exit. One of the bridesmaids became concerned when Brielle had been inside the tent longer than expected. She unzipped the entrance and stepped inside to check on her. Within seconds, the bridesmaid felt dizzy and lightheaded from the toxic atmosphere. She immediately backed out and shouted for help, realizing something was seriously wrong. Family members rushed to the tent entrance and could see Brielle lying motionless on the ground. They attempted to enter, but were quickly overcome by the same symptoms. Someone called emergency services, while others tried to ventilate the tent. 2 relatives managed to drag Brielle outside, but she was already unconscious, with blue-tinged lips and no detectable breathing. Emergency responders arrived within 11 minutes. They found Brielle unresponsive, with signs consistent with gas exposure. Despite immediate CPR and advanced life support measures, she could not be revived. The fire department confirmed dangerous levels of CO2 inside the tent. Investigators determined that a Warren regulator had failed, causing a steady release of gas into the sealed tent. The medical examiner confirmed the cause of death as asphyxiation due to carbon dioxide poisoning. The death was ruled accidental. The ceremony was canceled, and the venue later implemented gas detection systems. It was June 7, 2019, at an open-air estate venue outside San Juan, Puerto Rico. The reception had entered its final hour. The terrace overlooked a wide valley, and guests had gathered near the edge for the bouquet toss. The air had been still most of the evening, warm and steady, with only a light breeze moving through the trees. Cassandra Ellis was 26 years old. She worked as a pediatric nurse in Houston and had grown up alongside the bride, Layla. They were first cousins, raised in the same neighborhood and attending the same church. Cassandra had originally agreed to serve as a bridesmaid, but stepped down 3 months earlier when her hospital rotation schedule changed. She kept the dress anyway and wore it that night, standing just outside the bridal party as the reception moved toward its close. Family members later said she had spent most of the evening moving between tables, checking on older relatives, making sure everyone had water and a seat. She rarely stayed in one place for long. The videographer had hired an independent drone operator to capture overhead footage of the reception. The multi-rotor drone had been flying intermittently throughout the evening, used for wide shots of the terrace and sunset. During an earlier test pass, it briefly dropped several feet before stabilizing. The operator replaced the battery and resumed flying. When the bouquet toss was announced, Cassandra stepped closer to the center of the terrace with a group of cousins. Guests packed tightly together, faces tilted upward, phones raised. The drone lifted to approximately 30 feet above the crowd and held position. Cassandra stood near the front, slightly to the right of the bride. She looked up once at the drone, then back toward Layla as the bouquet was raised. The wind shifted just as the bouquet left the bride's hands. Investigators later determined the replacement battery had not fully latched into place. When a gust struck the drone's frame, power disconnected and the motors stopped. The aircraft dropped without resistance. Witnesses described seeing it fall, but not processing what was happening until it was too late. The drone descended directly over Cassandra's position, rotating slightly before striking the top of her head. The impact forced her straight down to the stone terrace. She made no sound and did not attempt to brace. For a moment, the crowd continued cheering. The music did not stop immediately. Then the space around her opened as people stepped back. Cassandra lay on her back, eyes partially open, unresponsive. The drone came to rest several feet away, 2 propeller arms broken against the stone. Emergency services were called within minutes. Family members remained near her while staff cleared the terrace. First responders documented severe head trauma and began resuscitation efforts on site. She had no detectable pulse and was not breathing. CPR continued As she was prepared for air transport, Cassandra Ellis was pronounced dead at 11:17 p.m. at a hospital in San Juan. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be traumatic brain injury resulting from blunt force impact to the crown of the skull. Federal aviation authorities opened an investigation into the drone operation, including compliance with Part 107 regulations governing flight over people and pre-flight inspection procedures. The venue temporarily suspended events while the inquiry proceeded. No mechanical defect was identified in the aircraft itself. Investigators concluded that improper battery seating caused the mid-air power loss.